Imagine this. You're tucking in your child at night. The bathroom is steamy from the bath. They're wrapped up in their favorite pajamas. And you reach for the storybook. You start to read about magical forests, brave princesses, and talking animals. And everyone knows, of course, they all live happily ever after. But what if I told you the bedtime stories we read to kids today began as tales so horrifying they were meant to keep grown men and women awake at night? The fairy tales we think of as sweet and innocent are actually, at their core, blood-curdling warnings, half true crime, half survival manual. Brutal folk memories that Disney, the Brothers Grimm, and others spent centuries trying to clean up. It turns out, for every once upon a time, there is a real disaster. A murder, a vanished village, or the shadow of something unspeakable lurking behind it. The infamous wolf? Not just some hungry animal, it was a way of warning about human predators. Wicked stepmothers? Sometimes real women determined to poison their way to power. The more I dig into these stories, the more I realize your favorite fairy tales almost certainly have a body count. The Brothers Grimm weren't so much collectors of fantasy as they were archivists of society's darkest secrets. Let's tear open the storybook and see what's really crawling around inside, starting with the Pied Piper. Picture it. Hamelin, Germany, June 26, 1284. Sunset bathes the narrow streets in gold, and in a few terrifying moments, every parent realizes something is horribly wrong. Their children, all of them, over 100 boys and girls, are just gone. No cries for help, no sign of a struggle, not even a breadcrumb left behind. It's so shocking that the townspeople carve the date right into the windows of their church. June 26th, 1284. If you visit today, you'll still find those marks. Here's the wildest part. The original story wasn't about mice at all. That came later. In the first version, it was simply a strange man in flamboyant clothes who lured the children out of the city, and in the blink of an eye, they vanished forever. Nobody could agree on the reason. Some thought the kids were led away to settle far-off lands, possibly forced into colonizing hostile territories. Others whispered about some failed crusade, or even a mass drowning. And while all of those theories are chilling, what gets historians' pulses racing is the specificity of the date. Medieval chroniclers didn't usually care about writing down exact days unless something happened that nobody could ever forget. Hamelin in the aftermath was devastated. The economy cratered. Families moved away rather than live in a town haunted by the memory of their missing children. And today, there's still a street called Bungelosenstrasse, the street without drums, where, legend says, music is forever forbidden, because that's the path the children took as they followed the piper. What we call a cute bedtime story was, and still is, a local horror, an actual tragedy, massaged into a story about pest control and catchy music. Little Red Riding Hood. Fast forward to 18th century France, where something scarier than the big bad wolf once stalked the forests. Meet the Beast of Gévaudan, a monster you don't want to believe factually existed. In 1764, locals reported a giant wolf-like animal, bigger than any normal predator, that hunted and killed over 100 people. Men, women, but especially children and teenage girls. It killed with eerie cunning, going for the throat, stalking its victims, even walking on two legs like a man. Here's where it gets almost too on the nose. Many of its victims were young girls delivering food through forest paths to sick grandparents. Sound familiar? One girl, Marie-Jeanne Vallée, actually survived an attack by stabbing the beast with a spear. She was carrying provisions to her family, just like Red Riding Hood. The earliest versions of this fairy tale weren't for the faint of heart. In Charles Perrault's 1697 telling, the wolf tricks Red into eating her own grandmother before devouring her alive. There's no lumberjack, no rescue. The warnings were blunt. Don't trust sweet talkers. Don't wander off the path. And always suspect the stranger who wants to know where you're going. These tales were less about happily ever after and more about surviving to see another day. And the reason wolves were so feared? They really did drag children out of medieval villages. Fairy tale or medieval version of a public safety announcement? The line blurs. Hansel and Gretel. For Hansel and Gretel, the story begins not with a witch, but with a famine. Between 1315 and 1322, Europe was in the grip of a crisis so severe that parents sometimes walked their children into the woods and left them there. It sounds unthinkable, but to medieval families, it was cruel math. Not enough food to go around, so the youngest were sacrificed so the rest might have a chance. Court records detail families driven to heart-wrenching choices, leading their children deep into the forest under the guise of foraging trips, only to abandon them in the slim hope those left behind might survive the winter. And the witch with the gingerbread house? Believe it or not, there were people during famines who lured desperate, hungry children inside with promises of bread, only to kill and eat them. Witch houses, as they were called, were discovered by authorities, sometimes with human remains nearby. There's even archaeological evidence of these abandonment stories. Shallow graves of children found far from towns, dated to periods of great hunger. The breadcrumbs Hansel drops weren't invented by Grimm or Disney. They're the real remnants of forest survival tricks, passed from parent to child out of necessity. Remember how to get home. If lost, mark your path. The fairy tale, with all its cannibal witches and crumbling breadcrumbs, is at heart about desperate kids trying to make it home in a world where even their parents, broken by hunger, could not protect them. Let's meet the real Snow White, a German noblewoman named Margarete von Waldeck, living in the 1500s. She had everything: beauty, family power, a stepmother who hated her. And she died at 16 of slow, deliberate poisoning. Marguerite was brilliant. She'd started challenging her family's use of child minors, literal children stunted by malnutrition and toxic substances, who worked in her father's mines and were locally called dwarfs. Her stepmother, however, was more interested in power than reform. Shortly after Marguerite began making waves, she fell ill and died. Court physicians suspected poison. Centuries later, when traces of arsenic and mercury were found in her hair, the suspicions only deepened. Margaretta's stepmother was notoriously vain. She spent vast sums on Venetian mirrors and cosmetics, obsessed with beauty. The brothers Grimm collected the Snow White story in this very region, drawing on a local oral tradition already swirling with details. The stepmother's hatred, the little people, miners, Snow White's sleeping corpse displayed to mourners, her perfect, unspoiled face caused by the very poisons that killed her. No magic, no true love's kiss. The true story is far more grounded and much darker. A jealous stepmother, a poisoned girl, and a family fortune at stake. A medieval tragedy masked as happily ever after. Now, brace yourself. In the oldest versions, Sleeping Beauty is not about a prince's loving kiss. The first written version, Sun, Moon, and Talia, by Giambattista Basile, tells of a king who finds a sleeping girl and assaults her while she cannot resist. She only wakes 9 months later when her newborn twin sucks the splinter from her finger, not from a kiss, but from the feeding instinct of a child. This wasn't just scandalous imagination. Basile was hinting at what really happened to women afflicted by mysterious sleeping sickness or catatonic episodes in medieval Europe. Catalepsy, depression, or mysterious illnesses left victims unresponsive. Tragically, history shows these vulnerable women were sometimes sexually assaulted in their comatose state, leading to unexplained pregnancies chalked up to miracles or curses. Even royalty wasn't safe. Documents describe noblewomen cared for by nuns who awoke to discover themselves mothers, only to learn those meant to protect them were in fact their predators. And the revenge subplot? Medieval sources tell of wives murdering rivals' children, sometimes feeding their husbands special meals. When Perrault and the Grimms rewrote Sleeping Beauty, they wanted nothing to do with this darkness. Out went the assault and cannibalism. In came the romantic kiss. But the old stories are clear warnings, not bedtime romance. They're reminders of how little agency sleeping, sick, or powerless women really had in a world that judged value by inheritance and bloodline. Bluebeard. Finally, let's talk about Bluebeard. The horrifying nobleman so monstrous, the truth still strains belief. Gilles de Rais, a celebrated war hero, was accused and convicted in the 1400s of unspeakable crimes, torturing, raping, and murdering more than 140 children in his castles. His method? Luring or purchasing children from struggling families, locking them in private chambers, and turning those rooms into nightmares. When his wives got too close to the truth or stepped out of line, they disappeared too. The forbidden room from the fairy tale? Based in fact, within de Rais's castles were secret spaces filled not with silk and treasure, but the remains of his countless victims. Even his vast wealth couldn't silence the truth forever, though justice came too late for many. Bluebeard is more than a warning against curiosity. It was a desperate, coded message warning women and children alike about the dangers hiding behind wealth and charm. So next time you open a fairy tale book, remember, once these stories were lifelines, messages carved out of the chaos and cruelty of real life. Disney gave us talking animals and musical numbers, but scratch beneath the surface, you'll find wolves with fangs, parents pushed beyond all hope, jealous murder for gold, and the terrifying knowledge that sometimes the world's real monsters wear the faces you trust the most. If you're captivated or newly terrified by these untold histories behind your favorite fairy tales, don't forget, leave a comment sharing the real story that shocked you the most. Hit like if you'll never look at bedtime stories the same way. And subscribe for more mysterious, fascinating deep dives. Who knows? The next legend might be living closer to home than you think.